2 years ago, I took a road trip to Dallas, Texas. It was a long drive, and I planned to do as much as I could each day. One night, I was driving, and it got to be really late. I was tired, but I knew I could keep going. I just needed a quick pit stop. I had literally no idea where I was. The only thing I knew at that particular time was that I was on some random highway in either Arkansas or Oklahoma. It was a little after midnight, and the roads were very quiet. I started looking around for a city or a place to stop. I was sleepy and also had to use the restroom. I had nothing left to drink and was out of snacks, but I knew if I could get some caffeine, I could drive for several more hours. Finally, after driving for like 10 more minutes, I saw a sign for a rest area up ahead. When it came up, I took the exit to the right and entered it. The rest area was very quiet and small. There was no other roads connecting to it. The rest area was just directly off the highway, and then the only option was to get back onto it. As for the rest area itself, it was just one long parking lot and then a small building. Surrounding it was a grass area and then lots of woods. There was also a wooded area between the rest area and the highway, so you couldn't see it from the road. I pulled into a parking space right in front of the building. I thought that this rest area looked pretty sketchy. It had just a few dimly lit streetlights going along the parking lot, and then one other one next to the building. The building also looked old and outdated. I considered just moving along and trying to make it to a town for another stop, but I thought about the drive. For like the last hour, I hadn't really come across any cities or much else. There was no telling how much farther I would have to drive before reaching something, plus the cell phone signal around there was spotty at best. And I knew that I needed something to drink, and this place probably had a vending machine at the very least. I looked around and saw that no other cars were in the parking lot at all. I didn't know whether to feel good or bad about this observation. On one hand, it was nice to have the place to myself and nobody else around, but on the other hand, it felt more creepy this way. As a smaller woman traveling alone, I was always trying to keep my guard up a little at night. I sat in my parked car and looked around. I didn't hear or see anything at all. I decided that it should be fine. I took my pepper spray just in case. So I got out of my car and then walked up the sidewalk into the building. I felt creeped out, but told myself not to be a wimp and there was nothing to be afraid of. After making it inside the building, there really wasn't much in there. The men's restroom was to one side and the women's to the other. Then there was a small lobby with a couple of vending machines and a few benches. I went in the restroom and was in there for maybe a minute. As I was washing my hands, I thought I heard footsteps inside the lobby. I realized that somebody else must have got there. I heard the footsteps go closer to the women's restroom that I was in, but the door did not open. The footsteps stopped right outside of it. Then someone started banging on the door very loudly. This was strange because the bathroom door did not lock. It was a bathroom where there were several stalls and sinks inside of it, so the door just swung open and could not be locked at all. I thought they would enter, but instead they just banged on it very loudly. I was very confused. For some reason, I didn't say anything though. The banging went on for maybe 30 seconds and it was really strange. Finally, it stopped. Then I heard footsteps walking away, and based on the footsteps, I guessed that it was a man. I'm not an expert, but they were louder and heavier and almost like work boots. I sort of heard the door open and realized that whoever was there was leaving. I was pretty creeped out by the whole thing. So I waited in the bathroom for about another minute and then left. I walked out of the bathroom with my pepper spray in hand. I looked around but didn't see anybody. When I left the rest area building and got back out into the parking lot, only my car was there. It was strange because I hadn't heard another car come or go. Even though I was in the building, I thought I would have heard that. Nevertheless, I walked out to my car and got back inside. I realized that I hadn't even gotten anything to drink or eat, but I felt that I no longer needed an energy drink. I was wide awake. Plus, I just wanted to get out of there at this point. I started my engine and began driving out of there. Now, the rest area parking lot narrowed at the end to a one-lane road. This went between the wooded area on both sides and then merged directly back onto the highway. As I was going to the end of the parking area and the road started narrowing, I suddenly saw something up ahead. I continued to drive, but then saw a man come out of the woods and go right onto the road in front of me. He was a good 50 feet ahead, but I had to slam on my brakes to avoid hitting him. The man had sort of long hair and a beard and was wearing a brown jacket, jeans, and what looked like work boots. Could this have been the man who was banging on the door? He stopped right in the middle of the road and now stood there, completely blocking my way. I stopped on the road and he just looked at me facing my direction. We were just staring at each other for what felt like a long time. It was probably about 30 seconds. I wanted to go around him, but there just wasn't enough space. The man started walking towards my car. I put it into reverse and began backing up. He didn't say anything or make any motions to me. He didn't wave or ask me to go around him or anything. As I backed up, he started walking faster. I realized that he was coming after me and I hit the gas harder. As I reversed more, the man started to run after me. I backed up all the way until I was in the parking lot. Then I turned the car around and started driving away. The man stood there back towards the end of the lot. If I wanted to leave, I would have to go past him. But then I decided to just go out the wrong way. I drove to the entrance and went along the one-way road there, going the wrong direction. If anybody had tried to enter the rest area from the highway in that moment, I would have possibly hit them head on. Thankfully, nobody was. I made it to the entrance and then did a sharp right turn and merged back onto the highway from there. Nobody else was on the highway at the time. Then I drove past the rest area. When I passed by where the rest area merged back onto the highway, as I was getting up to speed still, I saw the man again. He was standing on the side of the road just past the rest area exit, looking at me. I was so creeped out. I drove a ways and then called 911 and reported the guy. I was told that a police officer would go to the rest area and check it out. I never heard anything more. Looking back, I'm still wondering who that guy was and what he was doing. He definitely seemed to be up to no good. With just him and I alone in the rest area that night, it was a very creepy encounter. I had a pretty creepy experience when I took a road trip last summer with my girlfriend. We both had a little bit of time off work as we're both teachers. We love to travel and explore the country by driving around. That way we can stop at lots of cool places along the way. So we were going on a road trip to visit a couple of cities that we had never been to before. It was a fun time, and on the way back we were taking turns driving as we had before. I was doing most of the driving, probably like 70% of it, and my girlfriend would get a few hours of driving in here and there when I got tired. At one point we stopped at this truck stop gas station area for a rest. We had to get gas and we both needed to use the restroom anyways. It was pretty large and there was a ton of trucks on one end and then cars on the other. There was a store with showers and lots of food and stuff for sale inside. We stopped there at like 8 p.m. and it was decently busy. My girlfriend and I split up. I fueled the car and she went ahead and went inside of the store. Then when I was done fueling, I parked the car in another spot. I went inside and used the restroom, but then just went straight back to the car. My girlfriend was still inside getting snacks. A few minutes later, she came back and we left. Now, I believe that when we left that place, a truck started following us. It was an average-looking pickup truck, sort of old. I didn't really pay much attention right away. When we got back out on the highway as well, there was a decent amount of other cars around. But I just know that when it quieted down about an hour later, I remember seeing this truck behind us. I knew that it had been there for a while, but I hadn't been paying attention to exactly when. I just remember changing lanes to pass a car and the truck did the same thing. This was not strange, but when I put my car on cruise control when I got back in the right lane, I decided to just cruise there. I was having a snack of corn nuts that my girlfriend got me, and when eating and driving at the same time, I don't feel like passing people. I usually just cruise, so I was going at about 5 over the limit, and even though there weren't that many cars around, eventually some passed me. But this truck never did. It got closer to us and was not quite tailgating, but was following pretty close. It stayed in the right lane just behind me. I kept thinking that he would pass me as others were, but he never did. Eventually, I started to wonder about him. At this point, I was still not that suspicious, but I just found it a bit odd. So I kept going for like another hour with the truck behind me the entire way. Then we ended up losing signal on our cell phones. This happens when traveling across country sometimes. But it was too bad because the maps on our phones both stopped working. Many times, even when the signal is down on my phone, the map will still work, but this time it didn't. We knew that we were supposed to change roads up ahead, but I didn't know which exit it was. After driving for like another 20 minutes, I saw an exit that I thought I was supposed to take. That would connect us with the next highway that we were supposed to drive on. When we took that exit, the truck did as well, which made me suspicious. After taking the exit though, I started to see detour signs. My girlfriend and I were both very confused. We couldn't remember the road number that we were supposed to be on. I thought that it was correct, but I didn't know for sure. So we kept going and followed this detour. but things quickly seemed wrong. This detour took us off one quiet highway and then onto this really quiet and smaller road. That led us to an even smaller one-lane road and then to some random dirt road. Each new road that we were on, we seemed more and more lost. By now, I realized that I needed to turn around, but this truck was still there. I could not tell who was behind the wheel other than the silhouette looked like a man, but it was dark out. Eventually, when we were on this dirt road, I saw that it appeared as though the road was completely blocked up ahead. I didn't know what to do. I pulled over to the side of the road right there. The truck pulled over behind me. For a moment, I considered getting out and asking the guy what he was doing, but I quickly thought better of it. Then I decided to make a U-turn. However, as soon as I started to turn around, the truck turned to the left. I thought that the truck was also making a U-turn, but it stopped when it was completely blocking the road. It just stayed there and didn't move. So at that point, I stopped making a U-turn and turned forward. I drove up towards the sign blocking the road. I didn't know if I would be able to get past the truck as it appeared to be blocking me. I drove to the sign and then decided to go around it. I went slightly off the road and then went around the sign. Past it, the road still seemed fine. I then saw the truck starting to turn and move again. I floored it and went down that dirt road as fast as I could. Then I saw that the road had an intersection up ahead. I went to the left and then continued going faster. I turned again at the next road and then turned my lights off. I literally could barely see, but I carefully kept going and did not see the truck at all in my mirror. I did my best to then backtrack to the general direction of the highway. My girlfriend was trying to get a signal on her phone, but it wouldn't work. Soon enough, I turned my lights back on. We must have been navigating there for about 30 minutes until I miraculously made it back to the highway. Then I was able to finally get back on track and get a signal on my phone. I never saw the truck behind me after that, and my girlfriend and I were able to make it back okay. But I still wonder about that truck. What did that guy want, and what could have happened? I had a really creepy experience a few years back when I took a road trip. I was traveling to visit my girlfriend, who at the time was in school far away. She had just 3 months left until she would move back home, but I had some time off work, so I decided to make the drive. I did not fly so that I would save money, and even though it was a long drive, I didn't mind too much because I like road trips. So the plan was for me to drive all day, stay in a cheap hotel the first night, and then arrive at her school the next evening. On the first day of driving, I started after I got off work at about 2 p.m. I drove all the way until about midnight, and then I was too tired to go much farther, and I knew I needed to stop and get some rest. I was kind of in the middle of nowhere at that point though, so I just looked for any kind of a city or town. I took a random exit that had some signs for food. Well, the only food there was McDonald's and a Taco Bell down the road. There was also a gas station. But the only hotel was actually this cheap and run-down looking motel that was about a mile farther down the road from anything else. Surrounding it was nothing but the parking lot and then basically woods off in the distance. There was nowhere else to stay, and this seemed fine to me because of the fact that I wanted to stay at a cheap place anyways. So I drove into the motel parking lot, which was almost completely empty. It looked rough, like I said, but it wasn't completely awful. It seemed like it would be good enough for the night. After parking my car, I walked to the office, which was at the far end of the building. There was a man working, and I got a room for the night, which was very cheap. I felt good about how much money I was saving, and I convinced myself that the place would be fine. When I got into my room, it seemed like a standard motel. The room opened straight out to the sidewalk in front of the parking lot. Then inside the room was a bed, an old TV, and a bathroom. It wasn't that nice, but it didn't seem crazy dirty or anything. So I relaxed in there for a little while until I turned out the lights to go to bed. It was not more than a minute after I had laid down to go to sleep, though, that I heard a knock on the door of the motel room. This gave me a bad feeling right away based on the hour of night that it was and the fact that I was at a sketchy motel. I ignored it at first, but whoever was there knocked again. So finally, I got up out of bed and crept over to the window. There, I carefully moved the shades which had been covering the windows entirely. I looked, and there was a sketchy-looking man standing there outside the door. I couldn't see him that well, but he had longer hair and was wearing a sweatshirt and dark pants. He had a bit of a beard as well, but had an overall dirty appearance. I had never seen him before. He knocked once more, and I moved away. I hoped that he would go away, but he remained there. Finally, I heard him start to leave. I heard him walking off, and I looked out the window and saw him walking away down the sidewalk, and he quickly went out of my sight. He had been at the door for a total of probably 2 minutes. After he was gone, I was really not that tired anymore. My heart was racing. I turned on the TV to try to settle down and be able to go to sleep. For the next 30 minutes or so, I flipped around the channels and was just starting to relax again. Then, as I was still watching the TV, I heard another knock on the door. I was sure that the man was back. I went to the window and looked out of it again. This time, there was a different man there. This guy was wearing all black, had a hooded coat with the hood up, and I could barely see his face. Another sketchy-looking dude. I was definitely not going to answer the door for him either. He knocked again, and I ignored it. Then, this guy actually tried opening the door, which was locked. That really creeped me out, but after not successfully getting into my room, he walked away. I was so confused. 2 sketchy guys trying to get into my room. What did they want? I was certainly not going to be able to fall asleep now. I went back to watching TV, just trying to take my mind off of it. For the next 30 minutes or so, nothing happened. Then there was another knocking on the door. I looked, and it appeared as though the first guy was back. He knocked on the door louder than before. I watched him through the window, and he was standing there similar to earlier. The strange thing is that all my lights were still off, and had never been on when the guys were there. The TV was on, but it wasn't providing that much light or sound. Why did these guys think that somebody was here? The guy stayed at my door for longer this time. He knocked again, and I was really creeped out. Finally then, he left. I stayed up watching TV for over an hour. In that time, nobody came back, and then I was finally able to fall asleep. I'm not even sure how many hours of sleep I got that night, but thankfully nobody returned. I left the next morning and drove all the way to my girlfriend's college. Looking back, that's something that I still think about from time to time. I never figured out who those guys were or what they wanted. A few years ago, I had traveled for work a few states away. I was driving back on my own, and it would be a pretty long drive. On the road trip back, at one point, I stopped at a rest stop. It was nighttime, and I needed a break from driving to use the restroom and stretch my legs. This was a quieter rest stop, and I was kind of out in the middle of nowhere. It was maybe 9 o'clock at night, and I was planning on driving maybe another hour or two before finding a hotel. The rest stop was not that large, but there were a decent amount of other people around. After I parked my car, I went inside and used the restroom. As I came back out, I started to walk to my car. There was one guy there that caught my attention. He was standing off in the grass area next to a tree by himself. The guy was just creepily staring at me. At first, I didn't really think much of it other than it seemed a little strange, but the lighting wasn't great, so maybe he didn't mean to seem creepy. But he was certainly looking in my direction. I just kept walking and looked away and soon made it to my car. When I got there, I went inside and looked at the man again. He was still staring at me, and it just struck me as really odd, because he still seemed to have a creepy look on his face, at least from where I was. He was pretty far away, but there was no doubt in my mind that he was looking in my direction. Overall, he seemed like an average guy. He was wearing a hat, was about average height and weight, maybe kind of skinny, but the way that he stared at me just seemed really strange. But I wasn't really scared or anything because I was in my car and I could just drive away from him now. So I did. I left the rest stop, drove for maybe another hour and a half, and then stopped in whatever town that was and got a hotel. Things went fine and I continued to drive for the next day, basically driving all day until I arrived back home that night at about 7 p.m. I know that's when I got back because I remember looking at the time. So when I got back, I unpacked and stuff. I was in the kitchen and heard something at the front of the house. It sounded like it was coming from outside. It wasn't a knock on the door, but it sounded like somebody was maybe outside at the front step or near it. I don't recall if what I heard was footsteps or a bush moving or what exactly it was, but I walked over to the front of the house and looked out of the window. I saw that the same guy was standing there on my front step. He never knocked on the door. I turned on the outside light and he just ran away. He sprinted out of my yard and then down the street. I was so freaked out by the whole thing. I called my best friend and she talked to me on the phone until I calmed down. I could not believe how I was seeing this guy again. The last time that I had seen him was hundreds of miles away. After that night though, I never saw him again. I still don't know how to explain that. I've told several people about it and everybody agrees that it's insane. Some people think that maybe I saw a different guy but thought that it was the same person. And I guess that that's possible as I never got a really great look at him either time. But that would just be such a coincidence that two guys hundreds of miles apart wearing basically the exact same thing, were staring at me creepy. I think it's also possible that it was just a coincidence that he lived by me, but I find that highly unlikely as well. I don't know, but I'm just glad I never saw him again after that. I was on a road trip a few years ago, going back home from college. I had gone to a university that was a 10-hour drive from home. When I was done with school, I packed up my car and was on the way back. I never really brought that much stuff, but my car still had a lot in it. I drove this old car that was kind of in bad shape. It had a lot of miles on it and often had problems. But I was in college and didn't really have that much money, so I had put off getting it fixed. Also, because of not having much money, I was planning on driving home all in one day and not stopping at any hotels. After driving all day, I found myself only about 2 hours from home, but driving on some really quiet highway. There were mostly woods on both sides of the road, and things were very quiet as it was now 10 p.m. I was not that tired yet and was used to staying up late from being in college and stuff. So I continued with my driving and was just happy that I was almost back home. But then the engine started sounding real bad and my car ended up breaking down on the side of the road. My car came rolling to a stop and I didn't know what to do. There were really no other cars on the road. I took out my phone but wasn't getting a signal. This made things go from bad to worse. Now I really didn't know what I should do. I had no idea exactly where I was. I knew the general area but did not know if there were any gas stations or stores nearby. I hadn't seen any signs, and as I was looking around, I didn't see any lights off in the distance or anything like that. Nothing indicating that there were businesses up ahead. I thought about getting out and walking, but who knows how long that would take. As I sat there, I was trying to get my phone to work. I didn't know another option. I knew that my car had problems, but I didn't know enough to try to fix it. There was no use in messing around with the engine or anything. If I did, I would probably just make things worse. After maybe 10 minutes of trying my phone, I figured that my best bet was to get out and walk. I couldn't think of anything else to do. Every minute or two, a car would drive by, but nobody stopped to help me. And I was not mad about that, because who knows who would be out driving on the roads late at night. It could be some creep or weirdo. Still, I was kind of nervous to get out of my car. It was so dark and quiet outside, and I didn't know how long I would have to walk for. I was nervous about people, but I was also nervous about animals as the woods was dense and there was lots of wildlife in the area. Then, just before I was about to go outside, I heard a knock at the back window of my car. It startled me and I'm sure that I jumped. When I looked back, I saw some guy standing by my rear passenger side window knocking on the window. I remember that the guy was balding and I had no idea where he had come from. It looked like he had just come straight out of the woods. He also had a bit of a beard and there was no car on the road behind me. Right next to me was a ditch to the right and then the thick forest. I was not aware of anybody's property or anything like that either being nearby. I looked back to the man who now saw me, but he didn't say anything. He was just standing there. I didn't know what to do. I waved at him, but the guy didn't wave back or say anything. Then he tried opening the back door, which was locked. The guy then walked around my car to the passenger side and then around to the front of my car. During the whole time, he did not say anything at all. Then he arrived at my driver's side door and tried opening that. Then the guy started knocking at the window when the door didn't open because of it being locked, all the while not saying a word. I was so creeped out that I did the only thing I could think to do. I tried starting my car again, and miraculously, it started. I hit the gas and drove away from there. The man was left standing there on the side of the road. I got back onto the highway, and thankfully my car was able to make it all the way back home. After that, I took it to a shop and got it fixed, because I wasn't taking any more chances after that experience. Looking back, I think the guy came from the woods. I don't know where else he came from. What he was doing in there, I don't know. But I'm really glad that I got away from him. My friend and I were on a road trip on our way back to Kentucky from Ohio after a concert. We got about 20 miles out from the venue and we both decided to stop and grab a snack, as well as use the bathroom before the long overnight drive. We did our business, got our snacks, and hopped back into my car and ate. I looked at the GPS and realized it changed our route from the interstate to down some highway. I didn't really question it much because it was already midnight and we were tired and just wanted to go home. We started making our way down the highway when I realized there was literally nothing. No other buildings, no lights along the road, The only place I saw when we got off the exit was that gas station. Just the gas station and absolutely nothing else. There were hardly any trees we could see on our way down the highway, just open and flat fields. My GPS told me after 4 to 6 miles to turn on a small road. I thought it was weird that I had to turn on a road that didn't even have 2 lanes or any lights, just 3 sporadically placed houses that didn't even look like somebody lived in them. At this point, I started feeling off, but I didn't know the area and thought that it was a small connector road back to the interstate or something that was saving us time. I initially felt weird when we went to the highway instead of the interstate, but I thought that I was just being paranoid. My GPS told me that there was a railroad coming up, so I was ready for it. Problem was, I didn't see the railroad until we came right on top of it, the only light coming from my headlights. I had to slam on the brakes a bit because there was a train sitting on the tracks, blocking the entire road. The train looked abandoned, the carts covered in graffiti, and the wheels corroded badly. There were no railroad lights, no bells saying a train was coming through, just pitch darkness and silence. My friend and I both felt a chill run down our spine as we tried to make sense of the situation. We didn't know what exactly, we just had the feeling that something was off. My friend said my name in a scared tone, and I knew I had to get us out. There was no way forward around the train though. I put my car into reverse quickly and backed up until I was on the grass side of the road, and then I could turn around on the small road. As I began backing up, I saw figures and shadows in my rearview mirror, and I almost had a heart attack as multiple people jumped out of the tall grass that was beside the road. Then they went up to the car and pulled on the door handles of my car trying to get in. I booked it out of there, not caring if I ran anyone over on my way out. I proceeded to go 20 over the speed limit back down the highway and back to the gas station. When we finally collected ourselves, we sat and thought about it. Why would the GPS take us there if a train had clearly been sitting there for a while? Wouldn't that road have been closed off on maps and it would never route us there? With the clear ambush that had been laid and waiting for us, the possible option made sense that somebody had changed the route manually on our GPS while we were both inside of the gas station. We don't remember if we had locked the car doors or not, but we were tired from the concert, so it was easy to believe that we didn't. So many questions, but one thing I noticed the moment we parked at the gas station for the second time and restarted my GPS was that it went back to its original route on the interstate. We knew for certain that the train didn't just break down that day and they left it. It had been sitting for a while. The wheels just don't corrode like that if it was only broken down for just one day. I think we had somehow been victims of some elaborately laid trap for carjacking or worse. I was about 8 or 9 years old when this happened. My mom and I would take frequent weekend road trips when I was young, normally to national parks or trail areas to get me out in nature. We used to do this often, usually just the two of us. I don't remember where we were going that day, just that it was a long highway with lots of trees and no towns for miles. It was late afternoon. We had been driving for a while when we saw a man standing on the shoulder wearing a safety vest. He was waving his arm, not like he needed a ride, but like he was trying to warn us about something. My mom slowed down. I remember her saying, "Maybe there's an accident up ahead." She pulled over. Before I could even ask what was happening, the man opened the back door and got in. He was dirty. That was one thing I did remember clearly. His hands and face looked like he hadn't washed in days. He started talking right away. At first, it was random things. Something about being in the military, having to hitchhike to get to base, and saying it was normal. I didn't understand most of what he said. A lot of it didn't make sense. Then he started talking about nurses at a psych hospital, saying they had found his stuff. He used the word stuff before laughing and calling it something that I will not repeat. He looked at me when he said it too. My mom didn't react. She just kept driving, staring ahead. She asked him questions the whole ride, not deep questions, just enough to keep him talking. I realize now that she was trying to keep him focused on her, not me. Every now and then he'd ask me a question, but my mom would interrupt him with another one. She kept the conversation going like it was casual. I remember making myself small, turning towards the car door. I stared at the road signs because I didn't want to look at the man. He started commenting on my mom's driving, saying she was going too fast. She just laughed it off and said that she didn't want to fall asleep at the wheel. Later, she told me that she was hoping a cop car would pull her over. That was her plan. It started raining hard, not just a drizzle, but a heavy rain. We passed under an overpass, and my mom told the man that she would pull over and let him out so he could stay dry. He didn't want to leave yet. He kept saying things like, "I'm not bothering you," and "Come on, we're just talking." My mom kept her voice calm and said that we were going in another direction soon, and he'd be better off hitchhiking a different ride from the dry underpass instead of out in the rain a few miles down. Thankfully, this seemed to make a lot of sense to him, and he got out of the car. He stood under the overpass just staring at us as we pulled away. We didn't talk for a while. I think my mom didn't want to scare me, but I knew something wasn't right. Years later, she told me how scared she really was. She had no intention of picking up a hitchhiker. She thought it was a construction worker, but after he jumped in, she didn't know what to do. She also didn't know what he was going to do or what would have happened if he hadn't gotten out when he did. She said she kept thinking about how we weren't really near any towns either, and if something crazy happened, we didn't stand much of a chance in the middle of nowhere. We were lucky, that's the truth. This happened around 2 years ago. My family was on the way to Mexico. The main point of going was for my grandfather to meet my little brother, who was about 7 at the time. Some background for those who don't know the roads in Mexico. Once you cross the border, you either take the freeway or the toll road. The freeway is a fast pass to getting thrown off the road and off a mountain. The road isn't wide, and big trucks hardly fit in their own lane as if they respect the yellow line in the middle. Toll roads are supposed to be the safer alternative. You pay a certain fee depending on your vehicle at different spots, and there's supposed to be federal policemen along the highway. About 4 hours before we got to my dad's hometown, we approached a bridge with a lot of traffic, which was odd since the rest of the road hadn't been so clustered. Being from the US, we found it odd that some vehicles were driving over the white line on the right side of each lane in the shoulder. My dad, the driver, assumed it was to give access to passing. Keep in mind, we had never driven to Mexico alone, and it had been over 8 years since we were last there. So there was an 18-wheeler in front of us. It was one of those trucks that pulled 2 short trailers at once, but this one was pulling 3. He was moving so slow, being the cause of the traffic in the right lane. Since he was driving on the shoulder, my dad decided to pass him, still being able to do it without crossing the yellow line into the oncoming traffic. We noticed that the other cars were not doing the same thing, but didn't think much about it since we didn't hinder the truck as we passed it. After a while, I looked back out the back window, trying to take a picture of the sunset. When I did this, I saw the same truck coming at us full speed. My brothers noticed that I was staring out the window and looked back. My younger brother, 13 at the time, yelled to my dad that we needed to move. As if things couldn't get worse, there was a traffic jam in the oncoming lane, so there was no way of passing the vehicle in front of us. My mom began to panic, and she was constantly turning in her seat, yelling to my dad that the truck didn't seem to be slowing down. About 3 minutes later, my 7-year-old brother looked back and saw that the truck was tailgating us. The truck was flashing his brights at us, the driver's arm out the window, shooting us the middle finger and motioning us to pull over. As if a miracle, traffic was clearing out at an exit, and my dad managed to leave the truck behind. Around 30 to 40 minutes later, the same truck came flying past us, passing us in the oncoming lane as we were going uphill. He blared his horn and pulled into the correct lane again as a tiny white car came over the speeding hill, almost hitting it. To this day, I get chills thinking about what could have happened if my dad pulled over. Mexico is not a safe place, and when traveling there, depending on where you are, it can be dangerous even just driving. My fiancé and I went to Colorado for our anniversary getaway, where I popped the question and asked her to marry me. We are from Kentucky, so it was going to be a 16 to 17 hour car ride. We got to Colorado and it was beautiful, and we got engaged and had a good time. The day to leave came around and we got on the road at about noon. The last leg of the drive would take place through the night, as we didn't want to stop at a hotel for another night. We were about 2.5 hours away from home on the back roads of Indiana because the GPS took us some questionable ways. I was driving the last leg of the trip while my fiancé slept a little. It was about 4 or 5 a.m. at this point, and the sun was just starting to show over the horizon. As I drove down a narrow, curvy road, I started to notice a car had been following me for a nice while, and I got just a tad worried as I didn't have my firearm on me and we were in the country. I thought I was just being paranoid and tried ignoring the car. There was an extra curvy part of the road coming up, and next thing I knew, the car that was behind me got right up on my bumper and flicked their brights on. Not but 30 seconds later, after going around a curve, I saw 4 sets of tires sitting on the road kind of like a roadblock. I had no time to stop and didn't plan on it. I ran over the tires and felt a heavy smack and bump. Right as I turned the next corner trying to speed up and get away from the car still tailgating me, I glanced over and saw about 5 to 7 people crouching on the side of the road in some bushes. The rising sun was behind them and kind of lit them up so I could see them. At this point, I knew I was in some type of danger, and I floored it and started doing almost 100 miles an hour on this curvy back road. Seeing that I didn't stop and my tire didn't go flat, the car behind me slowed and eventually went out of sight. My fiance slept through the whole thing, and when we got to the next gas station to fill up, I saw about 5 or 6 nails in all 4 of my tires and a nice chunk of rubber missing. At this point, my fiance was awake, and the last thing I wanted to do was ruin her engagement trip by telling her what happened, so I never did. I took the car back to the rental office and went on my way. I'm super thankful the car I rented luckily had 4 brand new tires just put on it before we left, because it was a cross-country trip. I still get chills thinking about what would have happened if my tires went flat that day. This happened several months ago while I was driving across the country. I didn't feel that it was necessary to get a hotel room for the night, so I decided to sleep for a few hours at a Pilot travel stop. There was a parking area on the side of the building with 3 or 4 rows of spaces. The furthest row was near a fenced-off area. Most of the spots were filled with trucks and vans, likely other drivers who had also stopped to rest. I parked my car in a space closest to the main building since it had the most light, and I decided to get some rest. I had been asleep in the driver's seat for about an hour when I was suddenly startled awake by the sound of somebody walking near my door. I looked over and saw a guy starting to walk away. Then he turned around, saw that I was awake and looking at him, gave a little wave, and started walking back towards my car. He said, "Hey man, sorry to wake you, but my car won't start, and I was wondering if you could give me a jump." I was half awake and groggy, and for some reason I just kind of mumbled, "Sure, I guess." He replied, "Great, follow me around." So I started my car and drove around to where he was walking. He led me to the far back row of the parking area in the back corner near the fence. At this point, I was starting to realize how shady this situation felt. I stopped my car about halfway down the road thinking, just back up and drive off. He saw that I had stopped and started waving at me to pull forward. For some stupid reason I did, but I kept my windows up and the doors locked. As I pulled up, I saw an old beat-up RV parked next to an even more beat-up pickup truck, which was filled with garbage in the bed. The truck was facing the fence and the back towards the parking row where I was. The guy was standing near the front of the truck waving jumper cables and signaling me to pull closer. The way the truck and RV were positioned, there was barely enough space for a car to squeeze between them. Suddenly, a woman stepped out of the RV and began signaling for me to pull up as well. At this point, I was completely suspicious and freaked out. I shouted out the window, "No, I'm not pulling in there. If the cables can't reach, you'll have to find someone else." She got angry and started screaming at me to pull up, and then the guy ran over to her, yelling at her to shut up and get back inside the RV. He then walked over to the driver's side of my car and said, "Just pull up closer to the truck and I can hook up the cables and we'll be done." By that point, everything about the situation felt off, and I said, "No, I'm not going to be able to help with this." He gave me an irrational look and said, "Seriously? I've got to get to my mother's house. She's not feeling well, you know?" I replied, "I need to go," and I started backing out of the parking area to leave the station. As I was pulling away, I saw the woman come back out of the RV and start shouting at the man pointing towards my car. I couldn't tell what she was saying, but I got out of there quickly and I found another location closer to the city to spend the rest of the night. I don't know if they genuinely needed help or if it was a setup for something more dangerous, but I immediately regretted the decision I made. Also, I don't know why they couldn't just jump the truck using the RV. It was clear the situation could have taken a very bad turn.